Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Edward McLoughlin SDSA. Today, I'm pleased to welcome set decorator Lance Totten SDSA and production designer Toni Barton to discuss their imaginative collaboration on Peacock's original limited series, Fight Night: The $1 Million Heist. Inspired by the real 1970 armed robbery that took place on the night of Muhammad Ali's historic comeback fight, an event that transformed Atlanta, Georgia into the Black Mecca. Lance and Toni, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Edward.
How did you both come to the project?
I got a call 4 months before we were shooting, and I got the title, but didn't get the script yet. So I dived right into the podcast written by Jeff Keating and just became so engrossed. And then when I got the script, it was, from that point on, it was, whatever we can do. And then I thankfully called Lance. So,
yeah, Toni and I have a mutual friend in New York, a production designer that I worked with a lot early in my career, Ina Mayhew. And she recommended me to Toni, which was great. And when she told me I might be getting a call for an interview, I was like, great, I'll do it, whatever it is. Just tell me when I'm there and all of that. But all of that sort of, stuff aside, the reality of it was that for me, I've spent my professional career in Atlanta as a set decorator. And while I've worked in other places, this is where I live and where I've been for 30 plus years. So I consider it home. And anytime I get the opportunity to do a project here that takes place here, which is actually quite rare, it's something I always enjoy doing. I was so happy when I got the call, and then Toni and I had a great interview. And I think we both came away feeling excited about working together. And I think our collaboration I think that all shows in the end result. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I mean, we should say that this show really features Atlanta so strongly and its history. What were your initial talks with the director and the creatives on this and the writers?
So Shea Ogbonna was our showrunner. He's from Atlanta. He took on this project as a true love letter to Atlanta. And that was a mandate given to me. That was a mandate given to Lance. I had not been to the Hyatt Regency, but as an architect, to go into John Portman's building that was built in 1967. It's the first hotel ever to have an atrium space that opens up and all the balconies look down into the lobby. That, every hotel that you go into now replicates that hotel. And then to have the rotating restaurant on the roof, to build things that existed, like to go into the Clermont Lounge. We shot in the real Clermont Lounge, but we made it look like 1970. Or Lance is my impression of 1970, right, Lance? And then to recreate Paschal's restaurant, which has been around since the 50s. It's no longer in its original location, but if you look at the research, there are many photos of the restaurant that it looks just like it. All the banquette seats, all of the counters, the wood paneling walls.
Lance, talk about your research. How did you do that? How did you tackle that?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, when I started, Toni had already done some phenomenal research with the art department team, and we had a lot of really great things to draw on. Black family homes, from the area where Chicken Man's house really was in real life, gave us a good sense of things. And then the research on Paschal's and the hotel stuff, I thought was top notch. Again, for me living here, what's weird is that I've filmed in all these John Portman places all over the years, and we're always pretending like they're in Los Angeles or Chicago or New York or some imaginary fictional place or a show that took place in Dallas. And so being able to let them be the thing that they are in the case of the Hyatt, of course, was great. And when we talk about the Clermont, that was an interesting example too. I don't know, it's hard to know exactly what that looked like in the late 60s, early 70s, but it's definitely something a different type of production would have built on stage, I think, because it was so different. We put in wallpaper panels and brought in banquettes and, things that, and we did it all in a day. We literally had one day of prep. I think it was a Sunday when they were closed.
It's such an icon of a place in Atlanta. It must have been a challenge to recreate it.
Absolutely. And as Toni said too, though, can attest, when we do shoot in a lot of these real places, they don't look anything like they looked back then. So, the Polaris as it was then, it has been recently renovated and reopened, and it's nothing like what it was back then. So we did build our own version on a stage that I think drew from some elements of research, certainly. But I think we made the aesthetic choice or creative choice to kind of move it away from restaurant dining, which I think it had been and is now, and make it much like a club or a cocktail lounge. So I feel like that that type of thing worked really well. And then there was all the ingenious stuff that had to be sorted out with the views outside, because obviously the views of Atlanta now are not the views of Atlanta in 1970. So that's where Toni's collaboration with our post-production team really came in.
And so how many sets did you actually build? Did you have more than one stage?
We had 4 sound stages, and we built on many locations. So on those 4 sound stages, we had the first floor and the basement of that house, the party house, the Polaris bar that you just saw, at the Hyatt Regency penthouse. So we had the balcony outside, then you go into the penthouse suite, and then there was a terrace where there was blue screen on both sides and blue screen outside the Polaris. We had the precinct set, the Atlanta Police Department, where Don Cheadle's character was located. We had a ton of little small sets because there were so many characters that were introduced especially in the first episode. So we had a ton of little sets that we created. And then, of course, one of the last sets that I designed was the arena. The real place is the Municipal Auditorium, a building that was built originally in 1909 in downtown Atlanta, and then refaced and resurfaced in the 40s. And it was beautiful. We shot the exterior at the location. The interior is now owned by GSU, and it's been broken up. So we could not find arenas with flat floors and folding chairs and walls and balconies with 2 terraces. So we built it. Lance, I don't know how many chairs you had to find, right? But we built a portion, and then the set designers created all 3 levels and made a 3D model that was handed off to VFX to extend the set.
I know you had 2 DPs on the show. Your use of practicals seemed very intentional, and it seemed like to me that you were lighting. There must have been a close collaboration there. Am I right in saying that or not?
I think yes. I think in a sense, in as much as they all kind of are that way now, I think just because of the technology allows for a lot more lighting via our stuff than how it used to be when I started. And it was more just like, oh, this is a source that tells us where the light is coming from. And, of course, now with the digital photography, they can shoot at much lower light levels. So they don't add, you're right. They generally don't add as much light. I think that maybe a signature aspect of my style is to put a lot of lighting into a set. I mean, it's always something I've enjoyed just aesthetically, but the fact that they're using it, increasingly for the shots, I think works very well. And I think both of our DPs, who were both really, really nice fellows, were, at times they would have specific requests of like, we want a little bit of something like this, something like that. Those requests don't always jibe with, our design plans or period. So, there's always the fine line of trying to accommodate, those requests within the framework of what we're thinking about. I felt like I kind of had some creative license, as long as Toni was cool with what I was doing, in the sense of like, let's put all the right things there that should be there, and see how they use them. And I know there was one location where we filmed where the DP was joking with one of my on-set dressers about, it being a lamp store, there's too many lamps, or that kind of thing, which is like, you don't necessarily see them all at the same time,
Right.
and you can always take a couple away or move them around. But it is also a testament to the on-set dressers, that those things look as good as they do, and that they make it in where they need to be. And we did have a fixtures department on that show too, so they're able to do the technical things to our lamps that make them photograph in the way that they want, is always ideal too.
And were the DPs on for the run of the show, both of them at the same time?
When we started, Joe Williams was the first DP. He did the first block and the third block. We had 4 blocks in total. And Michael did the second block and the fourth block. But Jody stayed until the end because we had a lot of reshoots and regathering and, insert units and stuff that happened. So we had them from beginning to end. And, all of the Amwart sets, all of the main sets that were on the sound stages were designed with Jody, with lighting in mind. And just to the point of how many lights there were, the basement set, when you first go into the house, it's very dark. I mean, it's a different time. It's not a party. But then later on, when the series goes on, when that first episode goes on, we're getting ready for a party, and it's casino night. This is Uptown Saturday Night, and let's do it again. So Lance added some beautiful work to, as we added in all the different casino tables, added different spots of lights for the different parts. Making sure that we had enough light, we can see the people, we can understand what was going on, I think was definitely essential. And I love the way that Lance enhanced the whole space for the party.
It is interesting to note that, we filmed the actual party house exterior, the real house. So you can go in there and look around and go down to the basement and stand in the space and think about, how did they do this? Because there's obviously no photographs of this illegal underground, party that was put on for one night and then turned into, a crime scene. But we had to kind of figure out what the basement would have looked like in 2 different iterations. One, when it's just part of like his everyday work world, which was a numbers running operation, which in and of itself is not actually inherently visual. And we had to figure out a way to try to show how you would show a numbers operation and in its sort of day-to-day business. And then the bulk of the scenes down there, of course, take place during the party and the robbery and the aftermath of the party. So we did have a lot of creative license there. But for me, it was also really important to kind of keep it somewhat grounded in reality. And my thought was like, we have to think about what he could actually pull off and what he can do. But at the same time, no one but me probably cares about that backstory. It's how do you make it look sexy, and how do you make it look enticing, and how is it filmable, and how does it work for different directors? Like once you get to the point where everybody's in their underwear sitting on the ground. So it was one of those things where we did have to put a lot of thought into it. And Toni was great for a lot of discussion and analysis to get to that part.
Can you talk a bit about the color palette and how you it's again, that seemed very intentional and very controlled, and how did that work with costumes? Did you have a lot of chat between those guys? And
yeah, I mean, I'll say the color palette actually I created for my interview. The one thing that is scripted is that Chicken Man has a gold Cadillac. And just building that world, it became red and gold. But then we go to the family house. It's muted reds and gold. His church-going wife and his 3 lovely children, it's still red and gold. It's just really pinks and soft, ochres and, very soft colors. And then there's J.D. Hudson, who was the first African-American cop to integrate the police department. So his world is all blue and very linear. Very, there are straight lines up and down in the police precinct. There are lines in his kitchen wallpaper. There are just, even squares that are in the wallpaper in his living room. But it's all palettes of blue. And so those are the 2 contrasting worlds. And then everything else kind of just evolved beyond that. Terrence Howard plays a character that we built like purple shag carpet and just put him in a completely different world. And then also in episode 7, we go into the Dolphin Club. Between Chicken Man and JD, they start working together to basically solve this crime, solve what's happening. We see the clear palette of red, yellows, and blues all together and all kind of vibrant, but it's in a place that, it's a Chitlin Circuit club, that all the Chitlin circuits which were venues where African Americans could perform and could visit at the time in not only just the South, but on the East Coast. But they basically all closed because of immigration, because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this is a club that's been closed for a number of years, and our robbers are going to it. So we have all of the colors, red, yellow, and blue, in their most heightened, instances. This Dolphin Club was a real club in Jekyll Island, and it was on the segregated portion of St. Andrews Beach in Jekyll Island. There are very few photos of the interior, and there are only a few photos of the exterior. I went to Jekyll Island. I did a little research, and the building was a white painted cinder block building, painted white on the outside, painted white on the inside, and it had, VCT tiles that were all pretty boring. The only other thing that I didn't find a photo, but I found written research that said that the club had a horseshoe-shaped bar that took up a massive portion of the space. So, we took those essences, but stayed within our color palette and made sure that our story is being told over the entire arc of the season.
I think another challenge with the Dolphin Club worth noting was that, Craig, our director, was pretty adamant that there not be electricity there, which the whole reason why criminals are going to hide somewhere is because it's closed and it's not operational and no one can find them there. And so when they get there, it's boarded up, just enough to let some light in, natural light. And this is, of course, with natural light. And the fixtures that we're seeing here, we had to do some retrofitting of things that looked like they could burn candles. We had oil burning lamps. We had actual candles too. And then we had lanterns that had electricity, but which looked like they were flickering so that we could, see what's happening. Because there's also a bunch of night scenes in this place that has no electricity. and
iridescent paint and brass and a lot of things to reflect light coming in from the windows. What was not painted, I didn't have permission to paint because it was an old Confederate military base. So I could not paint walls that did not have paint or remove their windows or, it was a fun challenge.
For sure. There's a lot of shoe leather in those scenes too. I mean, there's a gunfight, there's, a kid loses his virginity, people are drinking, people are dancing. They get a phone call on the landline there. Remember, I had my issues with that. People don't realize it was expensive to have a phone. Like, if this place is closed, why would they still have the phone hooked up? But we went with it. I love the beer taps there too. That's a Caps riddle for sure.
I loved how the choice of blue was so prevalent, and that was interesting.
It's so great for me and my team. Lauren Jones was my assistant decorator, and I had two great buyers in Rachel Bell and Sarah Carter. And Sarah's an accomplished decorator in her own right. So, getting those people together was so wonderful. But coming into it with that kind of thought about palette, for us, really, it's so helpful and instructive in the sense that it gives us sort of, a guidepost. And so we talked, from the very beginning, about the Chicken Man color palette, as Toni was saying, and about J.D. Hudson's with the police station, certainly the police station being blue, but his home too. I think it was one of those things I picked up on in the podcast. I was impressed to understand that blue really was his favorite color in real life. And this guy was such a hardcore cop, through and through, even in spite of all the terrible treatment and all the things he experienced, integrating, becoming the first Black detective on the APD, but that he loved blue and this was his go-to thing. So for us, it was really, I want to say fun, but also just having that sort of clear focus to lead into is so helpful when you're trying to, build the physical representation of all of these things, and like, yeah, let's come back to that. Or what about the glassware? Or, you know, you see the upholstered bench, like things like that. And as we went through the show, as Toni was also saying, there would be more characters. Like, we had outlines. I don't think we did not have all of the scripts all the way through. So we would have things where we knew people were going to do this or where they were going to go there. But as characters would come in, we would try to continue this, like, defining their palettes. You know, I remember we talked a lot about Frank Moten and the penthouse. And I remember us talking about using reds there as opposed to, you know, the more, I want to say, sort of orange or gold colors in Chicken Man, and black, which we weren't necessarily really doing anywhere else. And how, I don't know, not to be too on the nose, but we were likening it to like the devil, you know, because he's so kind of a scary, imposing character. And then we sort of had the breakthrough with Chrome. I remember talking to Toni and saying, you know, we always associate the 70s a little bit more with brass and stuff too, but there's a lot of, at least in the South, I think Chicken Man has a certain level of sophistication where he wants everything to be gold. And I thought the idea of him, you know, the idea of Frank's world being chrome and having that be the metallic accents would be sort of like more modern or forward looking, being that this place is only 3 years old at the time too. So, you know, there's creative license in a lot of that, but it's also great to be able to talk about those kind of conceptual ideas, which I think, you know, while not super literal to the viewer, definitely have an overall psychological effect on the way we see the characters, hopefully.
Did you watch a lot of shows from the 70s? Obviously, that so much influenced your show, I think. No? Or am I misreading?
I feel like all of that stuff is in there, you know? And it was fun. We would talk about Uptown Saturday Night, and I my anecdote was, I remember being like a kid asleep in the back seat at a drive-in and like waking up, you know, in Detroit, somewhere where my parents lived at the time, and seeing on the big screen. Those things are all there, and I think we all like all of that stuff culturally. I know I've always enjoyed it, but I think for me, it's trying to drill down a little bit more on the reality of it. And the research, so that I never want to feel like I'm directly referencing a piece of art, because I think, you know, everything was art directed then too. So what you're getting, I think, in the theaters in 1970 is maybe a more stylized version of certainly what was really going on. But that being said, I mean, I did also remember that when I was about 10 years old, there was a movie in theaters called The Greatest, which was the Muhammad Ali biopic. He played himself, and most people don't remember this movie, but I'm like, what kind of baller do you have to be to play yourself in your own biopic? And, you know, so I went and tracked that movie down. It's not on any streamer. I think we found a DVD copy somewhere online and watched it, and it doesn't hold up a lot. It's not a great movie, but it is interesting to see him in his mid-30s portraying himself, you know, younger, and throughout sort of like a lot of these years. And it touches on the Atlanta fight and everything too, which I thought was interesting. But I think it's like, I know we all love that stuff cinematically, but I also felt like the directors would probably be bringing a lot of that to the party, and that we should try to at least initially lean into the more not as sexy, not as interesting, but more reality type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say without a doubt. I mean, obviously, I spent a long time watching the fight over and over and over again. And, you know, when Craig Brewer, the director, came in, and he made his decisions to, you know, have the blaxploitation splits and, you know, how the cameras and stuff would go. But we still have to build a world that is relatable, that's based off of history, and that's true. So I think Lance and I did our best to stay with what was real. Now, the one thing that we did have plenty of conversations about was that, you know, anybody thinking about this time period that was not alive, when you think of 1970, you think of like lava lamps and all these cool, funky things. And so, you know, Lance and I said, you know, we want to stick true to the history, which really means 50s and 60s, right? But there were plenty of times where we just said, this is too cool. Let's just make it happen. I mean, just in all honesty, you know, we are, what was the quote, Lance? We're not making a documentary. We were making entertainment. So Is that line.
But you had references in there, like the Too Busy to Hate graffiti that you had on there, and
that's Atlanta history. The mayor in 1956 said that Atlanta's the city too busy to hate, and meanwhile he was running against the current governor. That was the governor we depict in our show in 1970, who is a segregationist, whose son was the one that tries to hit Muhammad Ali in our show. So it's important to showcase what Atlanta is. Atlanta is also a blue dot in a red place. So, you have to show the history of what it really is. We didn't create that. Granted, yes, that mural didn't exist. Our lovely graphic designer created it. But it it's the kind of thing that in the mandate of making this love letter, it made our showrunner very, very, very happy.
I also just wanted to say, to the point about period authenticity, when we were fairly early on in prep and we were talking about all of these things, like Toni was saying about 1970s and what people's ideas are, I kind of came to an impasse that I think a breakthrough that really helped me a lot, having done some extremely rigid period stuff earlier in my career where everything had to be exactly correct. And then seeing in the ensuing decades a lot of really great television and feature films that sort of let a little bit of that go. And they're really fun and they're really enjoyable. And I just got to thinking, like, okay, I know that in 1970 Atlanta, most people's homes probably, in the same way not everything in your house right now is from 2025, there's probably not going to be a lot of those markers of what we consider the 70s, because it's going to be 40s, 50s, and 60s. And it's going to be, if we do it, correctly and do it to the T period wise, it's may end up looking a little, a little not quite as fun, not quite as exciting. But considering the other people that we're working with and where we're going with this and who's in it, maybe we need to let it sort of be what it wants to be within reason. I mean, I never want to do anything in a period thing that takes me out of the period. Obviously, we have to be respectful of that. But I just kind of feel like if it looks right and it feels right, and there's a lot of wood grain on it, you can kind of get away with being a little less literal, maybe. And so that was freeing. And before too long, people were asking for things like disco balls. And we were kind of like, no, they wouldn't have had a disco ball in 1970, not in Atlanta. I mean, concept of a discotheque was still a very European notion at that time, much less, in sleepy old Georgia. But, we found the way to make the compromises, I think, that the people won. And I think the end result is better for it, because it is fun and it is sexy, and hopefully we made it work.
I think you said it right there, is that what takes you out of the moment, and actually being very hard about those sort of parameters can take you out, because you go, oh my word, was that really the right period? Was that car right for that period? I occasionally do that and look it up and find that it was correct, but it took me out because it didn't feel right for some weird reason. So I think you both hit that note just perfectly. It was really cool. Very, very cool.
One of the other things that's very key to Atlanta, and Lance and I had this conversation multiple times, and that's the whole Coca-Cola aspect. Right next to, or like 2 doors down from City Too Busy to Hate, on the street where Muhammad Ali and J.D. Hudson are coming out, there is Jacob's Pharmacy, which is obviously where Coca-Cola was created. And we couldn't say Coca-Cola in our show, but we have hints to that.
Right. There was a lot of thought of it given to soft drinks. Like, I don't remember, maybe there was RC Cola, that little like country store, like outside, So yeah, I think we tried to do sort of like a fair and even representation of that kind of branding. And Peacock was very, okay about that sort of thing, because it's not an ad-based platform. And I knew this because of all of the language and the adult content. I knew this wasn't ever going to be on any sort of regular commercial NBC entity. So we felt pretty safe in showing real alcohol brands and, within the clearance guidelines, of course,
That droopy fan in that store is so brilliant.
That was an incredible location. I mean, that was just a really, really great place that, we took out a lot of things and put in a lot of things, but just the texture and the vibe and so much of it was like, yeah, like, that fan's probably from 1989 or something, which is obviously now that's pretty old to still have it, but you could never get a fan to look that great, I don't think, without $10,000 worth of scenic work, probably.
So Lance, tell me about acquisitions and purchases and rentals and who helped you out.
We had a really strong shopping team, and I had my great assistant director, Lauren Jones, who helped with all of that stuff too. We worked with a lot of our usual local SDSA vendors. Cleared Art Atlanta was one that we got a lot from. DPM Props, LCW Props is always very helpful to work with here. Myers Carpet, we did do quite a bit of custom stuff with them. That is always very helpful. We worked with the ISS that has a location here in Georgia for some of the hotel stuff. They had really great, some of the more small like hotel dressing came from ISS. And I worked with Skyline Blinds too, which does a lot of my custom window treatments for shows like this. Additionally, we did work with a couple of the New York prop houses that I hadn't had much experience with before. There was Fennec Studio Props and Newell Props. Both had some really fantastic stuff that helped us out a lot. I want to say it was the hair salon was a big location dress. I mean, it was like a build at a location. I mean, it is a functioning hair salon that Toni found and made fast friends with the real life owners of, who were really, really wonderful folks. Mm-hmm. And we did keep some of I think it was the sinks, the built-in stuff there was great to not have to bring that in, but we changed all of the seating and all of the salon chairs. And of course we had a lot of lighting and other stuff, but Fennec and Newell were really great for me. I hadn't worked as much with them before. I do work with Omega in Los Angeles a good bit. There's some of the stuff in Frank's penthouse, some of the artwork came from them. And we did some online vendors that I think are also SDSA affiliated, maybe Cherish. Caps is sort of my go-to. And here locally, I think that's them and Prop Source are two that we use a lot. But Caps was probably the single biggest. It was a good show for their kind of stuff, for sure.
Did you get much from biggers as well, or not?
A little bit. Actually, all of those chairs in the arena.
Do you remember how many there were? There was like 1,600 or 1,700.
Yeah, our numbers kept changing. I remember as we got more into the VFX and which part was going to be built and designed and which part wasn't. And I think at one point it was definitely in the thousands, and we were going to have to get some chairs that were white or some chairs that were black, and we would maybe have to do the balcony in the black ones and keep the wooden ones downstairs. And I was a little freaked out about how to unify all of that. But somehow it worked out in a subsequent recount after one of many drawings that you guys did. I think we got it to the place where we were able to use all of the same ones. And those did come from biggers. I don't know. We duplicated the hanging of the electrical cords, which when we would see it, Toni, remember we would see that in the research and be like, that kind of looks awful. Like,
right.
Why would you do that?
I think one of the grips came up to me and said, did you make a mistake?
Right.
Like, I watched hours upon hours of footage from that fight, and it has to be there. Like, it just has to.
Our lead man, Curtis Campbell, came up with a solution. I think it involves some type of garden hose or soaker hose or something. You can see where they're run along the back walls on hooks, and that's exactly how they draped them. The boxing ring itself involved a good bit of research. Lauren, my assistant decorator, really ran point on getting that together. It was super specific in the colors. There were some things about it that were a little unusual. There were things about it that would not fly today for safety reasons. So, explaining to the stunt people like, well, we're doing the ring in this way with the only 3 ropes instead of 4, and they're only going to be this far apart, and there's going to be real metal turnbuckles because that's what they did. So, you guys need to be careful because it's not going to be like this soft, cozy, safe, padded thing like you might be used to today, because we were really leaning into the authenticity there, because that's like Toni said, that's the thing that's been so widely photographed, and you can see it, I think, on YouTube. And
right. Well, I don't know, but I think we're coming to the end of this here. And I'd like to thank you both for being so great at your jobs to bring this off. It was so cool. And I would just like to say, to Atlanta with love. That was a great show. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Edward.
Thank you very
It means
much.
a lot coming from you. Thanks so much for that. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.